The summons arrived as a single line of cold text, and Assessor Prime Vol Nithrain read it the way a surgeon reads a death certificate, slowly, looking for the one error that would let him keep believing the world was orderly. The human vessel had violated Statute 9 of the Measured Accord. That was the charge. That was the whole charge. The Accord had governed the spiral arm for 9,000 years, and Statute 9 was the spine of it, the oldest and simplest law any species had ever agreed to keep. No single hull may carry a weapon mass greater than 400 tons, not a kilogram more. The number had ended 6 great wars before they could begin. It had turned ambition into paperwork. It had made the galaxy quiet. Vol had spent 41 years enforcing that quiet. He was an assessor of the tally court, the auditing arm of the Accord, and his entire life was a ledger of seized cannons and disarmed cruisers, and proud little empires made small again by a tape measure and a writ. He believed in the number the way other beings believed in gods. 400 tons. The edge past which the strong could not go. And now a human ship sat parked at the edge of the Sarowan drift, calm as a moored barge, and the court's long-range assay said it carried weapon mass of 11,000 tons. He read the figure 3 times. Then he assumed it was a sensor fault, because the alternative was that a backwater species barely 200 years into starflight had built a single hull that broke the oldest law in the arm by a factor of 27, and had done it openly, and had then sent the court a polite invitation to come and inspect. The invitation was the part that unsettled him most. Violators ran. Violators hid their tonnage in false manifests, and shielded magazines and bribed assessors. They did not write to the tally court and say, in clear trade standard script, that the Terran Free Concord welcomed inspection of the warship Quiet Ledger at the court's earliest convenience, and would hold position until an assessor arrived. No one welcomed the court. The court was the thing you feared. So Vol took the assignment himself, because a thing that did not behave like a violator was either a clerical mistake or a trap, and he had built a career on telling those two things apart. His cutter, the Plumb Line, crossed 60 light-years in 9 days and dropped into the Sarowan drift at a respectful distance, and there she was, the Quiet Ledger, 2,400 meters of human steel, dark gray, unhurried, sitting in the empty dark with her running lights low and her gun ports closed. She did not look like 11,000 tons of contraband. She looked tired. She looked like a ship that had been working a long time and expected to keep working. Vol opened a channel and read the charge aloud, every word of it, as the statute required. He cited the assay. He cited the tonnage. He informed the human vessel that it stood in flagrant breach of the Measured Accord, that its weapon mass was unlawful by a margin without precedent in 9,000 years, and that its hull was, as of this moment, impounded under the authority of the tally court, pending full assessment and disarmament. He expected defiance. He expected a fight, or a flight, or the stammering excuses of a captain who had gambled and lost. What he got was a man with gray at his temples and a coffee cup in his hand, leaning into the camera as if Vol had interrupted his lunch, which Vol had. "You're the assessor," the man said. "Good. We've been waiting. Come aboard. Bring your tape measure." His name was Commodore Hale Breivik, and he commanded the Quiet Ledger, and he did not seem to understand that he was in the worst trouble any captain in the arm could be in. He seemed, if anything, relieved that the court had finally shown up. "You are accused," Vol said, slowly, in case the human had not understood, "of carrying 11,000 tons of weapon mass. The lawful limit is 400. You have exceeded it by 10,600 tons. Do you grasp what that means?" "I grasp it better than you do," Breivik said. "Come aboard. You'll want to see the magazines yourself. People never believe the number until they walk the racks." That was true. Vol had impounded 100 ships, and not one captain had ever invited him to count the guns. They hid the guns. The guns were the crime. A captain who showed you the guns was a captain who wanted you to see something, and a thing a violator wanted you to see was, in Vol's long experience, a thing arranged for your benefit. He should have refused. He should have called for a court squadron and impounded the ledger from a safe distance and never set foot on a hull that broke the law by 10,000 tons. That was procedure. Procedure had kept him alive for 41 years. But the number was impossible, and impossible numbers were the only thing in the galaxy that still interested him, and the human was holding the door open. Vol took his cutter across and docked, and the airlock of the quiet ledger opened with a sound like a long breath, and Commodore Brevik was waiting on the other side with 2 crew and no weapons and the same patient, tired courtesy, as if the assessor were an auditor come to review the books, which, Vol supposed, he was. "Welcome aboard," Brevik said. "Let's go count." They walked. The corridors were wide and worn smooth, the deck plating scuffed by decades of boots. The walls hung with small things, a child's drawing in a frame, a list of names in plain script, a photograph of a green world Vol did not recognize. It was a lived-in ship. It did not feel like a smuggler's hold. It felt like a home that had decided to also be a weapon, and Vol found that he did not have a category for that, and the lack of a category was the first thing that frightened him. On the way down to the magazine deck they passed a galley, and the smell of it stopped Vol mid-stride. Bread. Someone aboard the most unlawful warship in the arm was baking bread. 2 of the crew sat at a long table with mugs in their hands, and they nodded to the assessor as he passed, polite, incurious, the way you nod to a man come to read the water meter. Vol had impounded 100 ships, and on every one of them the crew had watched him with the cornered eyes of people about to lose everything. These people watched him the way you watch the weather. He filed the observation, the way he filed everything, and the filing did not soothe him, because he had no category for it. A crew that did not fear the court was a crew that knew something the court did not, and Vol had spent 41 years being the thing that knew the most. "You feed them well," he said, because it was something to say. "We feed them like people," Brevik answered, "not like a crew. There's a difference, and it matters more than you'd think when you're asking them to do what we ask them to do. A frightened gun crew misses. A fed one counts." He said it lightly, but Vol heard the weight under it, and he did not understand the weight yet, and that not understanding was the second thing that frightened him. They reached the first magazine, and Brevik keyed the hatch, and the lights came up, and Vol looked at the racks and understood that the assay had not been wrong. There were more guns in that one compartment than the statute permitted in an entire hull, and it was not the only compartment. Brevik walked him to the second, and the third, and the deck kept going, magazine after magazine, the human Commodore naming each one in the same flat tour guide voice, until Vol had counted past 400 tons, and then past 1,000, and then he stopped counting, because the counting had become an act of self-deception, a way of pretending the total might still resolve into something lawful, and it would not. He had impounded a ship once, early in his career, that had hidden 40 tons of unregistered weapon mass behind a false bulkhead, and the captain had wept when Vol found it, and Vol had felt, in his young certainty, the clean satisfaction of the law catching a liar. 40 tons. He thought about that captain now, weeping over 40 tons, as he walked rack after rack of a human ship that carried 11,000 and had thrown open every door to show him. The proportion of it kept trying to fold his mind in half. He had built a career on the difference between 400 tons and 440. He was standing inside a difference of 11,000, and the captain was not weeping, the captain was offering him coffee. 11,200 tons, Brevik said, when they reached the end of the rack deck. Your assay was light. Most are. The court's censors stopped trusting their own readings somewhere around 8,000. They assume they're broken, because no one's supposed to be able to build this. He looked at Vol, and there was no triumph in it, only the steadiness of a man stating a fact he had stated before. We can. We did. And here's the part you came all this way for, Assessor. This is one ship. This is the small one. Vol said nothing. The corridor hummed. Somewhere deep in the hull, machinery he could not name kept its patient time. You came out here, Brevik went on, to accuse us of breaking your rules. I understand. It's a good rule. 400 tons. It's kept a lot of people from doing a lot of stupid things. He set the empty coffee cup on a rack ledge, gently, as if it mattered. But before you write your report, Assessor, there's something you need to see. And once you've seen it, the charge is going to look very different to you. Not because we didn't break the rule. We did. We broke it on purpose, every day, for 30 years. He started walking again, toward the bridge, toward the long forward windows and the dark beyond them, because somebody had to. The bridge of the quiet ledger was smaller than Vole expected and far quieter. There were no shouted orders, no banks of nervous officers. 11 crew sat at their stations, calm, unhurried, and they looked up at the assessor with a kind of mild interest, the way people look at weather. None of them reached for a weapon. None of them needed to. That was the thing Vole kept circling back to. A ship that had just been impounded by the tally court should have been a ship full of fear, and there was no fear here at all. Brevik stopped at the forward window and gestured at the dark. What do you know about the measured accord, Assessor? Not the law, the history. Who wrote it, who it was written for? Vole recited it from memory, because he had recited it 1,000 times. The accord was founded 9,000 years ago by the 17 first settling species after the Sundering Wars. Statute 9, the tonnage limit, was adopted to make total war impossible. No hull may carry the mass to end a world, therefore no hull can. The arm has known no extinction-level conflict since. That's the version they teach, Brevik said. It's even mostly true. 6 wars stopped before they started, you said. That's real. The number works. He turned. Now tell me who enforces it on the things the number was never meant to stop. The court enforces it on everyone. The court enforces it on ships, Brevik said. On hulls, on manifests, on species that build cruisers and dreadnoughts and battle stations. Things with tonnage you can measure with a tape. He held up one hand. What do you do, Assessor, about a thing that doesn't have a manifest, a thing that isn't a ship, a thing that the statute, in 9,000 years, never thought to put a limit on, because it's not a weapon you build, it's a weapon that builds itself. Vole felt the deck shift under his certainty. There's nothing the statute doesn't cover, he said, but he heard the doubt in his own voice, and so did Brevik. There's exactly one thing, Brevik said. Let me show you. He brought up a display, and on it was a region of the spiral arm that Vole knew well, a band of 9 inhabited systems out past the Sarowan Drift, the Velik Reach. The court audited those systems on a 40-year cycle. Vole himself had assessed 2 of them. They were quiet, lawful, ordinary places, and on Brevik's display they were marked, every one of them, with a small gray symbol Vole did not recognize. 11 years ago, Brevik said, the court's outer beacons in the Velik Reach went silent, one system at a time. The court logged it as beacon failure. Sent a maintenance writ. The writ came back unanswered, so the court reclassified the systems as depopulated and moved the audit cycle on. He looked at Vole. You remember this. Vole did remember it. The Velik Reach beacons. A clerical matter, reassigned to the long cycle queue. 9 systems, quietly relabeled, the way the court relabeled 1,000 dead beacons a year. Vole knew the procedure better than anyone alive. A beacon went silent. The court logged it. A maintenance writ went out. If the writ came back unanswered after one audit cycle, the system was flagged for resurvey. If the resurvey found no population, the system was reclassified depopulated and dropped from the active beacon network, and its audit was moved to the long cycle queue, which meant, in practice, that no living assessor would ever look at it again. It was a clean procedure. It was a good procedure. It accounted for stars that died and colonies that failed, and beacons that simply wore out after 1,000 years of service. Vole had executed that procedure perhaps 200 times in his career, and every single time he had felt the quiet satisfaction of a thing handled correctly, a loose end tied, a margin closed. He had never once asked, in 200 reclassifications, why a healthy inhabited system would let its beacon fail and then not answer the writ. He had never asked because the procedure did not require him to ask. The procedure required him to file. And a procedure that did not require a question was a procedure that could be run by a being who had stopped asking them, and Vol, standing on a human bridge, understood for the first time that he was that being, and had been for a very long time. They were not depopulated, Brevik said. They were eaten. The display changed. It showed the first Velic system as the human ship's instruments had found it, and Vol, who had spent 41 years cataloging the lawful and the small, looked at the thing in the middle of that system and felt the floor of 9,000 years of certainty drop out from under him. It was not a fleet. It was not a station. It was not anything the statute had a word for. It was a structure the size of a moon, gray and ridged and slowly turning, and it was hung with the carcasses of ships, hundreds of them, thousands, drained and folded into its mass, and from its surface new shapes were budding off, sleek and dark and identical, drifting away into the system on errands of their own. It did not carry weapon mass, it produced it. It was a machine that turned worlds into more of itself, and it obeyed no manifest because it had no captain, no crew, no flag the court could impound. The Velic, call them the accreditors, Brevik said, or called them. The Velic are mostly gone now. The word doesn't translate well. The closest we got is the compounding. He said it like a man naming an illness. We found one Velic colony still alive when we first crossed the Reach, 8 years ago. A single dome, 40,000 people, on the last unswallowed moon of the 7th system. They'd watched their whole civilization go beacon by beacon. They knew exactly what was coming and exactly how long they had, because they'd done the same arithmetic we had. The curve, the doubling, the date. And do you know what they were doing, Assessor, in the last dome, with the compounding 3 systems out and closing? He paused. They were filing an appeal, with your court. A formal petition for emergency reclassification, drafted by their own jurists, citing the proper statutes, asking the tally court to please send an assessor to verify that their systems were under attack by an unregistered entity, so that the matter could be moved out of the long cycle queue and onto the active docket. 40,000 people, the last of their kind, and they spent their final months doing your paperwork correctly, because they believed in the accord, because they thought if they only filed it the right way, someone would come. It's old, older than your accord. It sleeps in the deep dark between arms for 10 or 20,000 years at a stretch, and then it wakes up hungry, and it finds a region of inhabited space, and it begins, slowly, patiently, one beacon at a time. It doesn't conquer, it composts. It takes a system's ships and its stations and its orbital steel, and it rebuilds them into more of itself, and then it sends those out to take the next system, and the next. It grows on a curve. 11 years ago it had 1 seed mass and 9 quiet systems. Today it has 41 seed masses, and it has eaten its way to the inner edge of the Velic Reach. In another 60 years, on the curve we measured, it reaches the founding worlds of your accord. Vol could not speak. He was looking at the carcasses on the moon thing's flank, and some of them, he realized, were court hulls, assessor cutters, audit barges. The maintenance writ the court had sent, 11 years ago, to a beacon that had not failed. You knew, he said finally. You knew, and you did not report it to the court. We reported it, Brevik said. 30 years ago, the first time we found a compounding seed, out past human space, before it ever touched the Reach. We sent the court everything, scans, trajectories, the growth curve, all of it. Do you know what the court did with our report, Assessor? Vol did, in his bones, before Brevik said it. The court fined us, Brevik said, 11,000 credits. For operating an unregistered survey vessel beyond our chartered range. The report itself was logged as unverified third-party speculation from a species outside the founding 17 and filed in the long cycle queue, the same queue the dead Velic beacons went into. He let that sit. Your court doesn't have a procedure for a threat that isn't a ship. It has a procedure for paperwork. So it turned the worst thing in the arm into paperwork and filed it and went back to measuring guns. It was, Vol thought, exactly what the court would have done. He had filed 100 such things himself. Unverified third party. outside the founding 17, long cycle queue. The phrases were the bars of a cage, and he had spent his life building it, and now the thing the cage was supposed to keep out was already inside, eating its way toward home, while the court measured tonnage at the door. What happened to the appeal? Vol asked, though he already knew, the way he had known about the maintenance writ. The Velic appeal, the last dome. It's in the long cycle queue, Brevik said. We checked. We have access to the public docket, same as anyone. The petition was logged, assigned a case number, flagged for the standard verification cycle, and queued. The verification cycle is 40 years. The compounding reached the 7th system 14 months after they filed. He let the silence hold. Their case is still open, Assessor. Technically, if you go back to the court and pull the docket, you'll find an active petition from a people who no longer exist, waiting patiently for an assessor who was never going to come, perfectly in order, beautifully filed, doing exactly what your system was built to do, which is nothing, slowly, with a case number. He turned back to the window. We took the 40,000 off the moon before the seed mass arrived. They're alive. They're the only Velic left, and they live on human worlds now, and some of them helped us build the guns. But their petition is still in your queue. I thought you should know that, before you decide which report to write. So you built this, Vol said, gesturing at the magazines below them, at the 11,000 tons of unlawful guns. You broke Statute 9. You built a ship that can end a world, because the court would not stop the thing that was ending them. We built 30 of them, Brevik said. The bridge was very quiet. The compounding doesn't die to 400 tons, Brevik went on, his voice level. We tried it the lawful way first, Assessor. We brought a treaty-legal cruiser to the 2nd Velic seed mass, and we fought it by your rules, 400 tons of weapon mass, exactly to spec. We put every round we had into it. We scratched it. It absorbed our cruiser into its flank in under an hour and butted off a new shape that wore our hull plating like a trophy. The number that keeps the peace between species is the number that gets you composted when you face the compounding. 400 tons is a polite knock on the door of a thing that eats fleets for breakfast. He pointed down, at the deck, at the racks. 11,000 tons is a fist, and one fist isn't enough, so we built a hand. He keyed the display again, and the moon thing vanished, and in its place Vol saw something that made the 11,000 tons of the quiet ledger look, suddenly, exactly as Brevik had named it. The small one. A formation. 30 hulls holding station in the deep dark beyond the Sarowan drift, where no court sensor cycled, where no beacon watched. The quiet ledger was among them, and she was the smallest. The others ran up from her 2,400-meter length to a flagship at the center that Vol's eye could not at first take in as a single object, because it was 8 kilometers long, and it carried, the human display said, weapon mass of 290,000 tons. The Margin Fleet, Brevik said, 30 hulls, total weapon mass 4,100,000 tons, built over 30 years, in the dark, off the books, by a species your court fined for noticing the apocalypse. He almost smiled. The flagships called the lawful recompense. The crews thought that was funny. So did I. Vol studied the formation the way he studied a manifest, looking for the lie in it, because there was always a lie in a manifest, and finding it was the whole of his craft. He found none. The hulls were real. The tonnage was real. The discipline of the formation, the way 30 ships held station to the meter across light seconds of dark, was the discipline of a navy that had been at this a long time, and that frightened him more than the numbers, because numbers were a thing you could grow in a hurry if you were reckless enough, but discipline was a thing you could only grow in years. The humans had not thrown this together in a panic. They had built it patiently, over 3 decades, the way Vol's own court had built its procedures, and they had built it for one purpose, and they had not told a soul. You hid this for 30 years, he said. 30 hulls, 4 million tons. A species cannot hide a single unlawful cruiser from the court for a decade. We have beacons. We have audit cycles. We have 1,000 assessors who do nothing but count. How does a backwater species hide a fleet that breaks the law 10,000 times over, for 30 years, from the most thorough auditing body in the arm. Because your beacons watch the lanes, and your assessors count the hulls that file manifests, and your audit cycles run on a clock you published 9,000 years ago, Brevik said. We read all of it. Every public statute, every beacon schedule, every audit cycle. It's all in the founding archive, Assessor, free for anyone to study, and we studied it for 20 years before we welded the first plate. We didn't hide the fleet from the court. We built the fleet in the exact shape of the spaces the court doesn't look. Your law told us where your eyes were, so we put ourselves everywhere else. He said it without rancor, almost with affection. Your openness is a beautiful thing. It's the openness of a court that's never once been afraid of the dark. We used it. We're sorry. We're not sorry. Vol stared at the formation. 4 million tons. 10,000 times the lawful limit. A fleet that broke Statute 9 so completely that the statute became a kind of joke. A line drawn in the sand of a beach that the tide had already swallowed. And he understood, finally, why the human Commodore had welcomed the court. Why he had held position. Why he had opened the magazines and walked the racks and held the door. You didn't break the law and hope we wouldn't notice, Vol said slowly. You broke it and waited for us to come accuse you. You wanted the court to send someone. You wanted me. We wanted a witness, Brevik said. Someone from the court. Someone whose word it can't file in the long cycle queue. You came out here to write a report that says humanity is the criminal, Assessor. And you can still write it. Every word of it is true. We did break Statute 9. We broke it 10,000 times over. You can take that report back to the tally court, and we will not stop you, and the court will convene, and it will spend the next 60 years debating the proper fine for the worst tonnage violation in the history of the Accord. He stepped closer, and while it debates, the compounding will reach the founding worlds, and it will eat them the way it ate the Velik, one beacon at a time, and the last lawful 400-ton cruiser the court ever builds will scratch its flank and be absorbed, and the Accord will end not in war, but in silence, perfectly within its own rules, every manifest in order. He gestured at the window, at the dark, at the place where 30 unlawful hulls waited. Or you can come with us to the Velik Reach and watch what 11,000 tons does to the thing your number can't stop, and then you can decide which report to write. Vol Nethrain was an assessor of the tally court. He had impounded 100 ships. He had built his life on a number, and the number was 400, and he had just been shown 30 reasons it was not enough. He should have arrested Brevik. He should have called a court squadron and impounded the entire margin fleet, 4 million tons of flagrant breach, the greatest seizure in the court's history, a career-ending discovery in the best possible way. He could already see the citation. He could already see his name in the court's record, the assessor who found the human fleet. But he had seen the carcasses on the moon thing's flank. He had seen the court cutters folded into its mass. He had read, in his own memory, the maintenance writ sent to a beacon that had not failed. "Show me," he said. Brevik nodded, as if he had expected nothing else, and gave the order, and the quiet ledger came about and slid into formation with 29 other ships that should not have existed, and the margin fleet turned its blunt gray faces toward the Velik Reach and began, without hurry, to move. The crossing took 4 days, and Vol spent them learning a thing he had not known he did not know, which was how a fleet that broke every rule could be the most disciplined formation he had ever seen. He had assessed military ships. He knew the founding species navies, their proud cruisers, their nervous gun crews, their captains who saluted the statute and resented it. He had never seen anything like the margin fleet. The 30 hulls held station to the meter, across light seconds of dark. Their crews drilled without being told. Their gunnery officers ran dry fire problems against the recorded geometry of the compounding seed masses, over and over, the same shapes, the same angles, learning the enemy's body the way a butcher learns a carcass. 30 years, Brevik told him, on the third day, when Vol asked. We've been studying this thing for 30 years. We know how it grows. We know where it keeps its seed cores. the part that buds off new mass. We know it doesn't think, not the way you'd call thinking. It compounds, it follows a curve, and anything that follows a curve, assessor, can be gotten ahead of. You speak of it as a problem of mathematics. It is a problem of mathematics, Brevik said. That's the part your court got right, you know. The number really does work. 400 tons really did stop 6 wars. The mistake wasn't the number. The mistake was deciding the number was the only tool, and then filing away anything the number couldn't fix. He looked out at the formation. We didn't tear up your law because we hated it. We tore it up because we found the one problem it couldn't measure, and somebody had to measure it anyway. On the 4th day they reached the Velik Reach, and Vol saw the compounding with his own eyes, and not on a display. It filled the forward window. The 3rd Velik system, where a green world had once turned, was a graveyard of orbital steel being slowly, patiently digested. The seed mass at its heart was vast, far larger than the 11-year-old image Vol had been shown, ridged and turning, and hung with the bones of a civilization. Around it, in the cold dark, drifted the budded shapes, hundreds of them now, sleek and identical, each one a hull killer, each one waiting for the thing they did when prey arrived. And they began, as the margin fleet crossed the system boundary, to turn. It's noticed us, Brevik said, almost gently, the way a man notes a change in the weather. Good. We want it to notice. We want all of it looking this way. He keyed the fleet channel. All hulls. This is the recompense. We are weapons free in 9 minutes. Hold the line. Mind the curve. Vol gripped the rail. The budded shapes were coming, a tide of them, more than the entire court fleet, more hulls than the founding 17 had built between them, sliding out of the graveyard toward 30 gray ships that had broken the oldest law in the arm. Assessor, Brevik said, not looking at him, you're about to see why we built the fist. Watch the seed cores. Watch what 11,000 tons does to a thing that's never been hit by more than 400. The first of the compounding shapes crossed into range, and the quiet ledger, the smallest hull in the margin fleet, the one Vol had impounded 4 days ago for the crime of carrying too many guns, opened her ports and showed him what too many guns was for. The quiet ledger fired, and Vol Nethrain finally understood the difference between 400 tons and 11,000. 400 tons was a knock. He had watched 400-ton cruisers fight, and their fire was a careful thing, a measured exchange, a duel of equals trading scratches until one yielded. The quiet ledger did not duel. She did not trade. The first volley left her ports as a single sheet of light, and the lead shape of the compounding, a budded hull longer than a court cutter, simply ceased to be a coherent object. It did not break apart. It came apart, every joint and seam of it unmaking at once, and the pieces were still glowing when the second volley passed through where it had been and struck the shape behind it. 1, said a gunnery officer, in the flat voice of a woman reading a meter. 2, 2.5, 3. She was counting kills the way Vol counted tonnage, calmly, professionally, as bookkeeping. The tide of budded shapes met the margin fleet's line, and the line did not move. It had no need to move. 30 hulls carrying 4 million tons of weapon mass stood in the dark and fired, and the space in front of them turned to a wall of unmaking that the compounding's children fed themselves into and did not come out of. The shapes that had absorbed a treaty-legal cruiser in under an hour, that had worn human hull plating like a trophy, lasted, against 11,000 tons, an average of 1.4 seconds. Vol knew the number because the gunnery officer said it, to herself, after the 11th kill. 1.4. Logging it, improving it. He had come to the Velik Reach braced for a battle. This was not a battle. A battle implied two sides who might both lose. This was the thing the court's number had been built to prevent, and had, by preventing, guaranteed the moment when overwhelming force met something that had never been allowed to exist and discovered there was nothing on the other side of the door. Vol made himself do the arithmetic, because arithmetic was the only handhold he had left. The lawful limit was 400 tons. The quiet ledger carried 11,200. That was a factor of 28. He had spent his life believing that a factor of 2 was an emergency, that a factor of 10 was unthinkable, that anything past that was the sort of number you only saw in the records of the Sundering Wars, before the Accord, before the number. In the bad old time the founding 17 had built 9,000 years of law to never return to. He was watching a factor of 28 work, and it was not the chaos the old records promised. It was the most orderly thing he had ever seen. The fire came in measured volleys. The kills were logged in a calm voice. The line did not move because it did not need to. The Accord had taught him that great weapon mass meant great disorder, the strong running mad, worlds burning. The humans had built great weapon mass and pointed it at the one thing that deserved it and made it look like bookkeeping, and Vol understood that the founding 17 had been right about what unlimited tonnage did to the proud and the ambitious, and entirely wrong about what it could do in the hands of the patient. "They don't learn," Brevik said, watching the slaughter with no pleasure and no horror, only the attention of a man checking a sum. "That's the thing your court never understood about it, Assessor. It's not an army. It doesn't adapt under fire. It compounds. It throws mass at a problem and absorbs the result and grows from it. That works on a 400-ton cruiser, because 400 tons leaves something to absorb. It does not work on 11,000. We don't leave anything to absorb. We leave plasma." He nodded at the window. "It's still sending children at us. It'll send children at us until it runs out, because that's the only verb it has." And it was. The budded shapes kept coming, in their hundreds, and the margin fleet stood in the dark and erased them, hull after hull, and not one human ship took meaningful damage, because the compounding's children had been built to drown 400-ton cruisers in mass, and a 400-ton cruiser was not what they had found. Vol made himself watch. He was a witness. That was the role Brevik had chosen for him, and he understood now that it had been chosen with care, because a witness was the one thing the court could not file in the long-cycle queue. A report from a human survey vessel was unverified third-party speculation. A report from an assessor prime of the tally court, who had stood on a human bridge and watched 11,000 tons of unlawful weapon mass do in 90 minutes what 9,000 years of lawful 400-ton cruisers could never have done, was something else. It was testimony. "Why me?" he asked, over the steady percussion of the guns. "You could have brought any witness. A founding species captain, a court magistrate. Why an assessor?" "Because you're the ones who file it," Brevik said. "Magistrates make law, captains fight. But the court's whole power, assessor, the thing that actually runs the arm, isn't the magistrates, and it isn't the navies. It's you, the assessors, the ones who decide what counts and what gets filed. The Velik didn't die because a magistrate failed them. They died because an assessor wrote unverified third party in a margin and moved on." He looked at Vol for the first time since the firing began. "I don't need the court to forgive us for breaking Statute 9. I need the court to understand why we had to, and the only being in the arm who can make the court understand that is the kind of being who almost filed it away. You." The guns fired, the tide thinned, and then, as Vol watched, the seed mass at the heart of the system began to change. It had been turning slowly, patient, indifferent, content to throw children at the intruders and grow from whatever came back. Now it stopped pretending it could win by attrition. The vast ridged surface flexed, and great sections of it pulled inward, and the bones of the eaten civilization that hung on its flanks were drawn into its mass, and it began, with a terrible unhurried purpose, to build. "There it is," Brevik said softly. "Now it does the thing that killed the Velik. Watch, Assessor. This is the part your number never had an answer for." The seed mass was making a single shape, not a budded child, not a hull killer, something larger. It rose off the moon thing's surface like a thumb pushing through skin, and it kept rising, longer and longer, a spike of compounded steel and stone, and the digested bones of 100 ships, and it was. Vol realized as it cleared the seed mass and turned its blunt end toward the margin fleet, nearly as long as the lawful recompense itself. 4 kilometers of the enemy's own substance, assembled in 90 seconds, aimed. It can do that, Brevik said. It can compound a hull killer up to our scale, if you give it enough mass and enough time. That's how it took the Velic worlds with real navies. It outgrows you. It eats your fleet and builds something bigger from the pieces, and then there's nothing left that can hurt it. He keyed the fleet channel. Recompense ledger. It's spiking. 4-click mass. Building fast. Recommend we don't let it finish. The flagship answered, a voice Vol had not yet heard, dry and old. Concur, ledger. Stand by. We came for the core. And the lawful recompense, 8 kilometers and 290,000 tons, the largest weapon any species had built in the 9,000 years of the Accord, came forward out of the line. Vol had thought the quiet ledger's fire was the end of his understanding. He had been wrong. The recompense fired, and the volley did not erase a budded shape, it erased a region of space, a cone of unmaking that swept across the half-built 4-kilometer spike before the spike could finish becoming itself. And the spike, the thing that had killed worlds with real navies, came apart into glowing rubble that the seed mass tried to draw back and could not, because there was nothing left to draw, only plasma and dust and the slow cooling memory of a shape. It can't outcompound 4 million tons, Brevik said. That's the whole secret, Assessor. That's the thing 30 years of dead lawful cruisers taught us. The compounding wins by outgrowing you, so you bring more than it can outgrow. Not a little more, orders of magnitude more. You bring so much weapon mass to the door that the thing's only verb, compound, throw mass at the problem, runs into a wall it cannot climb, because we erase the mass faster than it can build it. He watched the seed mass reel, watched it try and fail to rebuild the spike, watched it begin, for the first time in 11 years, to lose ground. Your court built a number to stop war between equals. This was never going to be a war between equals. The only way to stop the compounding was to stop being equal, and the only way to do that was to break your law. Vol thought of the first time the humans had tried it the lawful way. A treaty-legal cruiser, 400 tons, every round it had, scratching the flank of the second seed mass and being folded in under an hour. He could picture it without being shown, because he had certified ships exactly like it, signed their tonnage as compliant, sent them out into a galaxy he believed the number had made safe. He wondered how many of the carcasses on the compounding's flank had been certified by his own hand. He wondered how many captains had died believing 400 tons was enough because an assessor had stamped it lawful, and the court had told them lawful meant protected. The number had protected them from each other. It had handed them, certified and compliant, and proud, into the mouth of the thing the number could not see. How many of yours did it take, Vol asked quietly, before you decided to break the law? Brevik was silent for a moment, watching the guns. 4 ships, he said at last. 41 years ago, before my time, a human survey expedition, lawful in every line, found the first seed out past our space, and did the brave correct thing, and fought it by the rules they were given. 4 ships, 1,600 tons total, exactly to spec. The seed ate 3, and the 4th ran home with the scans and the curve, and the warning that started all of this. He nodded at the racks below. Every gun on this ship is built on the readings those 3 dead crews bought us. We didn't break your law in a fit. We broke it the way you build a grave, slowly, knowing exactly who's in it, and why, and what it cost. 11,000 tons isn't defiance, Assessor. It's a debt. We're paying it right now, in front of you. The seed mass knew, now, in whatever way it knew anything, that the children were not coming back and the spike would not be allowed to finish. It did the last thing it had. It began to move, ponderous, the whole moon-sized bulk of it shifting, trying to put the dead green world between itself and the fleet, trying to flee deeper into the system, the way it had fled across 10,000 years of empty dark whenever a region grew teeth. It's running, Vol said, and could not keep the astonishment out of his voice. The compounding, the thing that had eaten the Velic reach, running. It always runs, in the end, Brevik said. That's how it's survived for longer than your Accord. It eats what it can, and it runs from what it can't, and it sleeps in the dark for 20,000 years and wakes up somewhere new. That's why the court's beacon logs never caught it. By the time anyone realized a region had gone quiet, the compounding was 1,000 light-years away, asleep, and the maintenance writs went out to dead worlds. He keyed the channel. Recompense ledger. It's making for the deep dark. If it gets clear of the system mass, it'll fold and sleep, and we'll spend another 30 years finding it. We end it here, or we never end it. That's why we brought the hand and not the fist, the old voice answered. All hulls, the margin fleet will form on the recompense. We go to the core, Assessor Nethrain. Vol startled at his own name on the flagship channel. You wanted to see whether the law could be saved, the old voice said. Watch closely. We're about to do the thing your law was written to make impossible. We're about to end a thing that eats worlds, with a single fleet, in a single hour, because someone built the mass to do it and chose to use it on the right target. A pause. Your number was right about one thing. A fleet that can do this should never be pointed at another people. So watch what we pointed at, and then go home and tell your court what their law cost the Velic, and what breaking it bought. The margin fleet formed up, 30 hulls in a blunt wedge, the lawful recompense at its point, 4,100,000 tons of weapon mass turning as one body toward the fleeing seed mass and the dead green world it was trying to hide behind. And Vol Nethrain, Assessor Prime of the Tally Court, who had come to the Sarawin Drift to impound a criminal and arrest a captain and write a clean report about a broken rule, stood on the bridge of the smallest unlawful ship in the arm and watched humanity go to finish a thing his entire civilization had been too lawful to even look at. The seed mass was faster than a moon had any right to be, and it knew the system the way only a thing that had spent 11 years eating it could know it. It fled along the old orbital lanes, shedding mass behind it to slow the fleet, flinging the last of its budded children backward in a rear guard that the quiet ledger and her sisters erased without slowing, and it made, with a cunning that was not thought, but was something almost worse, for the gravity well of the dead green world, where it could slingshot itself toward the deep dark and fold and sleep and be gone for 20,000 years. It's going to make the well, a navigator said. 8 minutes. If it folds before we core it, we lose it. We're not going to chase it into the well, Brevik said. Recompense ledger. Recommend the box. Already drawing it, the old voice answered. Margin fleet, the box, by the numbers. And Vol watched 30 hulls do the thing they had drilled for 30 years. They did not chase. Chasing was what the Velic navies had done, and the Velic were dead. Instead, the margin fleet came apart into a pattern. Vol's eye took a moment to read, and then read all at once, and the reading of it was the moment he understood that humanity had not merely built a fleet that broke the law. They had built a fleet that thought. The 30 hulls did not converge on the fleeing seed mass. They spread, fast, a sprint of gray ships flinging themselves wide across the system, and they were not aiming at the compounding at all. They were aiming at the lanes, at the orbital paths, at the slingshot geometry of the dead green world. 5 hulls took the inner lane and 4 the high approach and 6 the well itself, and they did not fire on the seed mass, they fired across its path, laying down sheets of unmaking not where the compounding was but where it had to go, fencing the open dark with 11,000 tons a hull until the only path left to the fleeing moon thing was the path the humans wanted it on. It follows a curve, Brevik said softly, watching. We told you. Anything that follows a curve can be gotten ahead of. It can't think its way around us, Assessor. It can only compound, and compounding is predictable, and predictable is a box you can build. He nodded at the display, at the narrowing dark, at the seed mass turning and finding every turn already closed by a sheet of human fire it could not cross and could not absorb. It's not fleeing toward the well anymore. It's fleeing toward the only gap we left open, and the gap is the recompense. The lawful recompense had not joined the sprint. She had taken station, alone, 8 kilometers of her, square in the one path the margin fleet had left unfenced, and she sat there in the dark, ports open, 290,000 tons of weapon mass aimed down the throat of the lane like a wall placed at the end of a corridor. The seed mass, herded, fenced, its every other path a sheet of fire, did the only thing its single verb allowed. It charged the gap. It threw its entire moon-sized self at the one open door, because throwing mass at a problem was the only thing it had ever known how to do, and across 11 years and 9 systems it had always worked. "There it is," Brevik breathed. "Come on, come to the door." The compounding hit the gap at the full speed of its flight, the whole digested bulk of a civilization aimed at a single human hull, and Vol gripped the rail and braced for the lawful recompense to be swallowed the way the treaty-legal cruiser had been swallowed, absorbed, worn as a trophy. The recompense fired. It was not a volley. Vol had no word for what it was. The flagship of the Margin fleet opened every port she had at once. 290,000 tons of weapon mass discharged into a single point at the closing range of a charging moon, and the unmaking did not strike the seed mass so much as it occupied the same space the seed mass was trying to enter, so that the compounding flew, at speed, into a region of the universe that had been edited to no longer permit the existence of compounded matter. The leading third of the moon thing simply stopped being. The middle third followed it, peeled away, unmade, and the seed cores at its heart, the budding organs the humans had spent 30 years learning to locate, the part that turned worlds into more of itself, were laid open to the fire and erased before they could even register that the fleeing was over. The compounding came apart in the gap the Margin fleet had drawn for it, and the coming apart was total. There was no rubble for it to draw back. There was no mass for it to absorb. There were no children left to throw. 11 years of eaten worlds and 10,000 years of patient sleep ended in a cone of human fire at the end of a corridor, and the thing that had no captain and no flag and no manifest, the thing the court's number could not measure and so had filed away, was gone, scattered as plasma across the orbit of a dead green world, cooling, forgetting how to be. For one terrible second, as the moon thing charged the gap, Vol was certain the humans had miscalculated. He had spent his life watching ambition overreach. He knew the shape of a plan that was a fraction too clever, a margin too thin. The compounding was vast beyond reckoning, the digested wealth of 9 worlds aimed at a single hull, and the lawful recompense sat in its path alone, and Vol's whole experience of the galaxy told him that a thing that big could not be stopped by a thing that small, law or no law, tonnage or no tonnage. He had impounded 100 captains who had believed otherwise about something or other, and they had all, in the end, been wrong. The humans were not wrong. That was the part that rearranged him. The recompense fired, and the universe simply declined to permit the compounding to finish its charge, and the arithmetic Vol had spent 41 years certain he understood, revealed a region he had never been allowed to see, the region past a factor of 700, where weapon mass stopped being a thing you measured against an enemy and became a thing the enemy was measured against. The humans had gone there on purpose. They had built a ship for that region and crewed it with people who baked bread, and they had brought him to watch, because no report in the long cycle queue could ever make a court believe a region of arithmetic it had outlawed itself from ever seeing. The bridge of the quiet ledger was silent. The gunnery officer was not counting anymore. There was nothing left to count. "Confirm the cores," Brevik said, and his voice was not triumphant. It was careful, the voice of a man who had watched this thing flee once before and would not believe it dead until the sum was checked twice. "Cores confirmed destroyed," the navigator said. "All 41 seed signatures across the reach went dark when this one died. They were linked. Kill the mother, you kill the curve." A pause, and then, quietly, "It's done, Commodore. The reach is clear." Vol Nethrain stood very still. He had watched a fleet that broke the oldest law in the arm by 10,000 times do, in a single hour, the one thing 9,000 years of lawful 400-ton cruisers could never have done. He had watched it not as a slaughter, but as a piece of bookkeeping, fenced and herded and summed and closed, a problem of mathematics solved by a people who had refused to file the problem away. And he understood, standing in the cooling silence, that everything he had believed about the Accord, about the number, about the careful, small, lawful galaxy he had spent 41 years keeping, was both true and a lie, and that the trick of it, the real trick, the thing humanity had done, was not the fleet at all. "You let me accuse you," he said slowly, turning to Brevik, "on the channel, 4 days ago. You let me read the whole charge. You cited the assay yourself. You walked me through the magazines and made me count past 400 tons. He felt the shape of it assembling. You wanted it on the record. The accusation, mine, an assessor of the tally court, formally charging the human fleet with the greatest tonnage violation in the history of the Accord. You wanted my charge first." "We wanted your charge first," Brevik agreed. "Because a charge has to be answered," Vol said. "The court cannot file a formal charge in the long cycle queue. The moment an assessor prime enters a charge into the record, the court is obligated to convene, to examine, to rule. You couldn't make the court look at the compounding by reporting it, because a report can be filed. But you could make the court look at the compounding by committing a crime so large that the court would have no choice but to convene a full hearing to judge it." He stared at the human Commodore. "And at that hearing, every fact about why we built the fleet becomes part of the record the court is legally required to examine. You turned your own crime into the one summons your court cannot ignore." Brevik smiled. "Finally, a small tired thing. We broke Statute 9, he said. "We really did, Assessor. Every word of your charge is true, and we will not contest a single one. But a charge under Statute 9 requires the court to convene a tribunal of assessment, and a tribunal of assessment is required, by your own founding law, to examine the full circumstance of the violation. The circumstance of our violation is the compounding, the dead Velic worlds. The maintenance writ sent to a beacon that did not fail. The report your court fined us 11,000 credits for filing 30 years ago." He spread his hands. "We can't make the court read our warning, but the court can't try us for breaking the law without reading exactly why we broke it. So we broke it as loudly as we possibly could, and we waited for the court to come and accuse us, and we made sure the assessor it sent saw everything with his own eyes. We didn't fight your law, Assessor. We used it. We turned the one rule we broke into the only doorway through which the truth could walk into your court." Vol looked out the forward window, at the cooling plasma where the compounding had been, at the dead green world that would never live again, but would also never feed the thing that ate it, and at the 29 other unlawful hulls already reforming into their disciplined line. "You needed a witness who would testify," he said, "and you needed me to come to that conclusion on my own, because a witness who was told what to say is a witness the court can dismiss. So you showed me, and you let me arrive." He was quiet a moment. "It is the most elegant violation of the Accord I have ever assessed. There is a thing I do not understand," Vol said, and he was surprised to hear his own voice be steady. "You have a fleet that can do this. You have, by your own account, more than you have shown me. You found the worst thing in the arm, and your court fined you for noticing it, and filed your warning in a margin, and left you to fight it alone for 30 years. Any species I have ever assessed, with this much power and this much grievance, would have come to the founding worlds, not as a defendant, but as a conqueror. You could rule the Accord. The number cannot stop you. Nothing can. Why are you flying back to a court that despised you, to stand trial for saving it?" Brevik looked at him for a long moment, and the tiredness in his face was very old. "Because the number was right," he said. "That's the part I need you to take back with you more than any of the rest. 400 tons really did stop 6 wars. It really did keep the strong from eating the weak for 9,000 years. We've read those wars, Assessor. We've read what the arm was before the Accord, in the Sundering, when there was no number and the strong did exactly what the strong always do. We don't want that back. We don't want to be the thing the number was built to stop." He gestured at the racks, at the fleet, at all 4 million tons of it. "A people who would use a fleet like this to rule are a people who shouldn't have built it. So we built it, and we hid it, and we are going to walk into your court and hand you 30 hulls and stand trial, because the only proof that we built this to shield you and not to rule you is that we'll still bow to your law even now, even holding this, even after what your law cost the Velic. The bowing is the proof. If we don't bow, we're just a bigger version of the compounding, and then the number was right about us too. He almost smiled. We'd rather lose the trial than win it the wrong way. So, will you testify? And Vol-Nethrain, who had built his life on a number, who had nearly filed the apocalypse in a margin, who had impounded 100 ships and never once asked what the ships were for, looked at the man who had broken the oldest law in the arm in order to keep the law's own purpose alive, and felt 41 years of certainty rearrange themselves into something he did not yet have a name for, but which felt, for the first time in a very long time, like the truth. "The court sent me here," he said, "to find out whether the human fleet had broken Statute 9. He turned from the window. "It has. I will so testify. Every word of the charge is true. And then I will testify to the circumstance, in full, as your law requires me to, until every assessor on the tribunal has heard what the number cost the Velic, and what breaking it bought the founding worlds another 60 years. He paused. "They will not thank me for it." "No," Brevik agreed. "They won't. The court doesn't thank the assessor who finds the body in the long cycle queue, but it has to convene, and once it convenes, it has to look." He keyed the channel, and the lawful recompense answered, and the margin fleet, 30 hulls and 4 million tons and not one of them lawful, began the long quiet turn back toward the Sarowen drift, and the court, and the hearing that the humans had built an unlawful fleet expressly to force. Vol-Nethrain watched the dead green world fall away behind them, clean now, ruined but clean, and thought about the writ, the maintenance writ, sent 11 years ago in his own court's hand to a beacon that had not failed, because the alternative to a failed beacon was a thing the court had no procedure to imagine. He had filed 100 such writs. He would file no more. He thought too about the word the humans had chosen for their fleet, and how he had missed its whole meaning when Brevik first said it, the margin fleet. He had taken it for a joke at the court's expense, a jab at the assessors who lived in the margins of manifests, and perhaps it was that. But margin had another sense, the engineer's sense, the sense that meant the distance between what a structure could bear and what was asked of it. A bridge with no margin stands until the first heavy load, and then it does not. The Accord had been built with no margin against the dark, perfectly sufficient for the load it was designed for, the load of species quarreling with species, and not 1 kilogram more. The humans had looked at a galaxy with no margin and built the margin themselves, in secret, out of unlawful steel, and named the fleet for the thing it was, the difference between what the Accord could bear and what the dark was about to ask of it. He had impounded that difference 4 days ago and called it a crime. He understood now that it was the only thing keeping the bridge up. He did not sleep. On the crossing back, he sat in the small cabin the humans had given him, and he wrote, by hand, in the old assessor's script, the testimony he would give. He wrote the charge in full, because the charge was true. And then he wrote the circumstance, and as he wrote it he found that 41 years of margins and queues and clean-closed files were emptying out of him onto the page. Every reclassification he had signed, every petition he had let age in the dark, every captain he had certified compliant and sent out proud and protected into a galaxy that the number could not protect them in. By the time the human cutter raised the founding worlds, he had filled the cabin's small desk with paper, and he had not absolved himself of a single line of it, and he had never in his life felt so much like an assessor, which was to say, like a being whose one true duty was to count things honestly, no matter who the count condemned. The Tribunal of Assessment convened in the Hall of the Founding 17, on the oldest world the Accord governed, and it convened because it had no choice, because an Assessor Prime of the Tally Court had entered a formal charge into the record, and the founding law required that a charge under Statute 9 be examined in full. Vol-Nethrain stood in the witness ring at the center of the hall and looked up at 9 assessors of the High Tribunal, beings older and higher than himself, the keepers of the number, and he understood that everything he was about to say would end his standing among them, and he said it anyway, because he had stood on a human bridge and watched the cost of saying nothing. He read the charge first. He read it in full, as the law required, and the hall listened in a silence that thickened with every figure. The warship Quiet Ledger, weapon mass 11,200 tons. The Margin Fleet, 30 hulls, total weapon mass 4,100,000 tons. Statute 9 exceeded by a factor that had no precedent in 9,000 years. The assessors did not interrupt. They did not need to. The charge was so vast that it answered itself. The humans were guilty. The only question the hall thought it had to settle was the size of the punishment. Then Vol said the second part, the part the law also required, and the part the court had spent 9,000 years building procedures to avoid. He read the circumstance. He told them about the Velic Reach. He told them about the beacons that had gone silent one system at a time, and the maintenance writs the court had sent to worlds that were already being eaten, and the reclassification of 9 inhabited systems as depopulated because the court had no procedure for a thing that ate worlds and so had a procedure for a failed beacon instead. He told them about the compounding, the moon-sized seed masses, the curve, the founding worlds 60 years from being composted. He told them about the report a human survey vessel had filed 30 years ago, and the 11,000 credit fine the court had levied for filing it, and the words an assessor had written in the margin of the only warning the arm had ever received. Unverified third party, outside the founding 17, long cycle Q. And then he told them what he had seen with his own eyes. He told them about 11,000 tons, and what it did to a thing that had absorbed a lawful cruiser in under an hour. He told them about the box the Margin Fleet had drawn in the dark of the third Velic system, and the gap they had left, and the moon-sized horror that had charged the gap because throwing mass at a problem was the only verb it owned. He told them that the compounding was dead, all 41 seed masses dark, the reach clear, the founding worlds bought another lifetime, and that it had been done in a single hour by a single fleet, because someone had built the mass to do it and chosen to use it on the right target, after the court had spent 30 years choosing to file the target away. The hall was very quiet when he finished. The first assessor of the High Tribunal, oldest of the 9, keeper of the number for longer than humanity had been spacefaring, looked down at Vol from the high seat and spoke the thing the court existed to speak. The violation is admitted. The circumstance is noted, but the law does not bend to circumstance, assessor. That is the whole of its strength. If we permit one fleet to exceed Statute 9 because its cause was good, we permit every fleet to claim a good cause, and the number that ended 6 wars becomes a number that ends nothing. The humans broke the law must answer. The Margin Fleet will be impounded and disarmed, and the precedent of 9,000 years will hold. The first assessor's voice did not waver. Bring in the human delegate. Let the sentence be read to their face. Commodore Hale Brevik was brought into the witness ring, and he did not look like a man about to be sentenced. He looked tired and patient and faintly, privately amused, the same way he had looked when Vol first saw him with a coffee cup on the bridge of the Quiet Ledger, and Vol understood, with a slow, cold certainty, that the humans were not finished, that the trick had a second half, that the accusation, the fleet, the witness, all of it, had been the first move, and the tribunal itself was the board on which the real game was being played. You've heard the charge, the first assessor said to Brevik. You do not contest it. We don't contest a word, Brevik said. We broke Statute 9. We broke it by 4 million tons. Everything the assessor told you is true, and we're proud of all of it. He looked up at the 9. Impound the Margin Fleet. Disarm it. That's your right, under the founding law, and we'll comply. We will surrender 30 hulls and 4 million tons of weapon mass to the tally court, here, now, without a shot. He let that sit, and then he smiled. We will surrender the fleet you found. The hall went still in a new way. The Margin Fleet is 30 hulls, Brevik said, conversationally. The court assessed all 30. The assessor stood on the bridge of one and watched the others fight. 30 hulls, 4 million tons. That's the violation you're sentencing. He tilted his head. I want to be very precise, because precision is the court's whole religion, and I respect that. The margin fleet is the fleet we built to kill the compounding. It is the fleet we showed you. It is the fleet we are surrendering. You speak as though there is another, the first assessor said. There are 900 others, Brevik said. The number went into the hall like a blade. Vol, in the witness ring, felt the floor of the moment shift, and then he understood that he had been waiting for this without knowing it, since the bridge of the quiet ledger, since Brevik had said this is the small one and meant it as the first sentence of a much longer argument. The 30 hulls had never been the point. The 30 hulls had been the cost the humans were willing to pay, the down payment, the thing they put on the table so the court would believe they had nothing left to hide. A defendant who surrenders his fleet looks like a man emptying his pockets. The court had been counting the surrender, satisfied, certain it had the measure of the violation, and Brevik had let it count, the way a man lets you count the coins in one hand while the other hand holds the deed to the house. The second assessor of the High Tribunal, who kept the records, spoke before the first could. 900 is not a number you have proven. You have proven 30. The rest is a claim. The court does not sentence on claims. The court doesn't sentence on claims, Brevik agreed. But it can't disarm one either. You've put your finger on it exactly. You can prove 30, so you can impound 30. You cannot prove 970, so you cannot impound them, and you cannot find them, and you cannot disarm them. You have built your entire authority on proof and measurement, assessor, and it has served you for 9,000 years, and I admire it, and right now it is the thing that makes you powerless against us, because we have given you the only fleet you can measure, and kept the one you can't. He spread his hands, and there was no cruelty in it, only a terrible patience. That's the whole of it. The court rules what it can measure. We have built something it cannot measure, on purpose, for your own protection, and there is nothing in 9,000 years of your law that knows what to do with a thing it cannot count. The margin fleet was the demonstration, Brevik said, into the silence. 30 hulls. We built it to kill the compounding and to be found, because we needed the court to see, with its own assessor, what 11,000 tons does to the thing your law couldn't measure. But we did not spend 30 years learning to break Statute 9 in order to build 30 ships. He looked up at the 9 keepers of the number, and his voice was gentle, almost kind. We built the Concord Wall, 970 hulls, total weapon mass, somewhat over 130 million tons. It is positioned, as of this hearing, along the deep dark approaches to the founding worlds of your accord. Not to threaten you, to shield you, because the compounding is dead, but the compounding slept in the dark for 10,000 years before it woke in the Velic Reach, and there is no reason to believe it was the only thing sleeping out there. And your number, assessors, your beautiful number that ended 6 wars, has never once protected a single world from the dark. It was never built to. It was built to protect you from each other. It has nothing at all to say about what's coming for all of you. No one in the hall spoke. The 9 assessors of the High Tribunal, keepers of the number for 9,000 years, looked down at a human commodore who had just told them that a species 2 centuries into starflight had, in secret, built a wall of warships around their own founding worlds with 130 million tons of unlawful weapon mass, and that the wall was already in position, and that they had not been asked. This is a threat, the first assessor said, but there was no certainty in it. It is the opposite of a threat, Brevik said. If it were a threat, you would never have known about it until it fired. It's a wall. We built it in the dark, off your books, with no manifests and no charters and no permission, because if we had asked, the court would have fined us 11,000 credits and filed the request in the long cycle queue, and the next thing that comes out of the deep dark would eat the founding worlds the way the compounding ate the Velic, perfectly within the law, every beacon log in order. He spread his hands. So we didn't ask. We built it. And now we're telling you, the way you tell someone you've already done a kind thing they were too proud to accept. The Concord Wall stands between your founding worlds and the dark. It will go on standing there, whether you sentence us or not. You can impound the 30 hulls of the margin fleet, and we'll let you, because the law is the law and we did break it. But you cannot impound 970 ships you cannot find, defending worlds you cannot defend, against things your number was never built to see. Vol-Nethrain, standing in the witness ring, understood at last the full shape of what humanity had done, and it took his breath. They had not broken the law to defy the court. They had broken it visibly, with 30 ships, in order to be charged. They had forced the tribunal to convene, because a charge could not be filed away. They had made an assessor a witness, because a witness could not be dismissed. And now, with the entire high tribunal assembled and legally bound to examine the full circumstance, with every keeper of the number in one hall and obligated to listen, they had revealed the thing they had actually built, which was not a fleet but a shield, and they had revealed it in the one room where the court could not pretend it had never been told. The 30-ship violation had been the key, the real fleet had been the door, and the door opened onto a truth the court could no longer file in any margin, because 970 hulls were already in position, and the assessor who had nearly buried the warning had read it aloud to the high tribunal's face. "You will surrender the location of the Concord Wall," the first assessor said, and even as the words left, they sounded less like a command than a hope. "No," Brevik said, kindly, "we won't. Because the moment you have its location, you'll convene a tribunal and assess its tonnage and rule that it violates Statute 9, which it does, by 130 million tons, and you'll order it disarmed, and then there will be nothing between your founding worlds and the next thing that wakes up in the dark, and you'll all be composted lawfully, with every manifest in order, and the last thing the court ever does will be to file the apocalypse in the long cycle queue." He shook his head, slowly. "We're not going to let you disarm the thing that's keeping you alive. We love you too much for that, and you've earned it too little. The wall stays. The wall stays dark and unfound, and exactly where it is, and you will be safe, and you will not have agreed to it, and that is the price of 9,000 years of filing the dark away in a margin." A murmur ran the length of the hall, the founding species delegates leaning to one another, and Vol heard in it the sound he had heard in his own chest on the bridge of the quiet ledger, the sound of a certainty coming apart. For 9,000 years the Accord had known exactly what it was. It was the keeper of the number. It measured, and it ruled, and the measuring and the ruling were the same act, and that act had made the galaxy quiet. Now a human stood in the witness ring and showed them, gently, that the measuring had a horizon, and that everything past the horizon was a place their law had never thought to look, and that the worst things in the dark lived precisely there, in the unmeasured, in the unfiled, in the long cycle queue where a dead beacon and a world-eater looked exactly the same on a court form. "You have made us afraid," the first assessor said, and the admission silenced the hall, because the court did not speak of fear. In 9,000 years, no one has made this court afraid. The founding 17 built the Accord so that fear would have no purchase here. The strong could not frighten the weak, because the strong could carry only 400 tons, and 400 tons frightens no one. You have unmade that. You stand before us holding a fleet we cannot find, and we are afraid, and you tell us the fear is for our own good. The old voice was not angry. It was something worse. It was lost. How is this different, human, from every tyrant the Accord was built to stop? They too said their strength was for our protection. They too asked us to be grateful for a leash we did not choose. "Because a tyrant would not have come here," Brevik said simply. "A tyrant would not be standing in your witness ring, having handed you 30 hulls inviting your sentence. A tyrant rules from behind the unfindable fleet. We are not behind it. We are here, in front of you, unarmed, telling you it exists, and that we will not use it on you, and that you may not have it. The difference between a shield and a leash, assessor, is which way it faces, and ours faces the dark. You don't have to take my word. Watch where the Concord Wall is. It does not encircle your founding worlds. It stands between them and the deep dark, in a long thin line, all its guns pointed outward, at the night, at nothing you can see yet. A leash points in, a shield points out. Go and look, if you can find it. You'll find every gun aimed away from you." He paused. That's the only proof I can give you, and it's the only proof that matters. We built the thing that could rule you, and then we pointed every gun the other way. A people who would do that are not the thing your number was built to stop. We're the thing your number forgot to imagine. The friend. The hall was silent for a long time. And then the first assessor, oldest of the 9, keeper of the number for longer than any living thing in the arm, did a thing that had not been done in the hall of the founding 17 in 9,000 years. The first assessor was quiet and thought and did not reach for the law. The number ended 6 wars, the first assessor said at last, and the voice was old and slow and for the first time uncertain. It is not nothing, Assessor Nethrain. It is not the foolishness this human paints it. It kept the strong from the weak for 9,000 years. That is not a small thing to have built. It is not a small thing, Vol agreed, from the witness ring. It is the largest good our accord ever did. The humans agree. They told me so, on the bridge of the smallest ship I have ever feared. The number was right. The mistake was never the number. He looked up at the 9. The mistake was deciding the number was the only tool, and filing away everything it could not measure. The number kept us from killing each other. It never once kept the dark from killing us, and we let ourselves believe a thing that protects you from your neighbors could protect you from the night. The humans did not break our law because they scorned it. They broke it because they found the one enemy it could not see, and they would not file it in a margin, and someone had to. The first assessor looked down at him for a long moment. You charged them yourself, the first assessor said. Your name is on the writ. You found the largest violation in the history of the Accord, and you have spent this hearing arguing that we should let it stand. Do you understand what that does to your standing among the assessors, Vol Nethrain? I understand it ends it, Vol said. I have impounded 100 ships and never once asked what they were for. I will not be trusted with the tape measure again, and I should not be. I filed the apocalypse in a margin once, in my own hand, with my own seal, and called it unverified. I will not do it twice. If the cost of telling this court the truth is my place in it, that is the smallest price anyone in this matter has paid. The Velic paid more. The first assessor was silent again. The 9 keepers of the number looked at one another, and at the human in the witness ring, and at the assessor who had charged the humans and then refused to let the charge become a grave. When the ruling came, it was not the ruling the court had convened to make. The tribunal found that the warship Quiet Ledger and the 30 hulls of the Margin fleet had exceeded Statute 9 by 4 million tons, and that the violation was admitted, and that the law was clear. It impounded the 30 hulls, formally, on the record, and the humans surrendered them without a shot, exactly as Brevik had promised. 30 gray ships handed over to a court that had no idea what to do with weapon mass it could not lawfully exist near. And then the tribunal did the thing it had spent 9,000 years building procedures to never do. It opened a new statute. It convened a standing question, the first in the Accord's history, on the matter of the deep dark and the things that slept in it, and it appointed, to chair that question, the one assessor in the arm who had stood on a human bridge and watched the number fail and lived to read it into the record. It did not thank him. The court did not thank the assessor who found the body, but it gave him the question, and the question was the largest thing the Accord had ever been brave enough to ask. The conquered wall was never found. The court never assessed its tonnage, never impounded a single one of its 970 hulls, never learned where in the deep dark it kept its long patient watch over founding worlds that had not asked to be defended and would never quite admit they were. It simply stood there, unlawful and unfound, 130 million tons of human steel between the Accord and the night, exactly as Brevik had said it would, the kindest thing one species had ever done to another against that other's express and ancient law. Commodore Hale Brevik flew home in a borrowed cutter, his demonstration fleet surrendered, his real fleet hidden, his crime admitted, his purpose achieved. He had been accused of breaking the oldest rule in the arm, and he had not denied it for 1 second, and he had used the accusation itself as the key that opened the one door through which the truth could finally walk into the court. He had broken the law so loudly that the law had been forced, for the first time in 9,000 years, to look at the thing it had been built to ignore. Vol-Nethrain did not go with him. He stayed, to chair the question, to build the procedures the Accord had never had, to teach a civilization that had measured guns for 9,000 years how to look at the dark. It would take the rest of his life. He did not expect to be thanked. He had stopped, somewhere in the third Velic system, needing to be. But on the last night before the human cutter left, he went down to the surrendered hull of the Quiet Ledger, where she sat impounded in a court dock, dark and quiet, and stripped of nothing yet, and he walked her worn corridors one more time, past the child's drawing in its frame, and the list of names in plain script, and the photograph of a green world he now knew the name of. And he stood for a while in the silence of a ship that had broken every rule he had ever kept, and he thought about the writ, the maintenance writ, sent in his own court's hand to a beacon that had not failed. He had spent 41 years believing the galaxy was orderly, and that the order was the law, and that the law was the number. He had been wrong about the last part, and right about the first, and the difference between them was 11 years of dead Velic worlds, and 4 million tons of weapon mass, and one tired human commodore who had loved a court that fined him for noticing the end of everything, and had defended it anyway, in the dark, against its will, with a wall it would never find and never thank him for. The aliens had accused the humans of breaking the rules. The humans had not even argued. They had simply revealed the fleet, and then revealed the larger fleet behind it, and then, in a hall that had not changed its mind in 9,000 years, made the keepers of the rules understand that some rules are written to keep you from each other, and some things in the dark do not care about your rules at all, and the only people who will stand between you and those things are the ones willing to break the smaller rule to keep the larger purpose alive. Vol set his palm flat against the cold, worn wall of the Quiet Ledger, the smallest ship in the Margin fleet, the one he had impounded for the crime of carrying too many guns, and he understood, at last, what too many guns had been for. Then he straightened his coat and went back up to begin the work of the rest of his life, which was to teach an old and lawful and frightened galaxy how to finally look the dark in the eye, the way one tired species, unasked and unthanked, already had.